Hi.
Hey. So we are doing a two-part video together.
Yes.
We want to talk about rug making because we talk about it a lot in our theory videos, our process videos, but we've never really slowed down and shown you the two methods of rug making that we use.
Yeah.
And we are, the good news is that I do mostly traditional rug hooking, so I can show you that. And
I do punch needles, so we kind of can complement each other. And I've been brushing up on my rug hooking a little bit lately, anyway.
Absolutely.
So, but
yeah,
we're going
to
do
both. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do predominantly. If I was going to do a big piece, I would do punch needle.
And I would do rug hooking.
Yes.
So two sides of it today.
Yeah. And what's interesting is they're so similar. I think it's more the material. Like I can't punch with wool strips. So if I want that look of those beautiful kind of structured wool strips, but I also can't help but combine the punch needle piece I'm going to show you right now.
So we each have a cat piece.
Yes, we each have a cat
piece. And Liz's
piece.
is punched and mine is hooked. And as Liz said, mine is made from wool fabric strips. So it does give it a very distinct look.
Yeah. And mine is made from yarn, but you can see around the edge I wanted some structure, and I did some rug hooking right around the edge.
Yeah.
So
two different rug making techniques, and we figured we'd start kind of from the beginning and let you know how we made these small pieces.
Yes.
So with rug hooking, I figured I would start. There's a lot of overlap.
Definitely.
With materials in the two types of rug making.
Yes.
You need four main things to make or punch a rug. And they only differ in a little tiny bit. The first thing you need is some sort of foundation material. Now at my studio, Loop by Loop Studio, we primarily use monk's cloth, which is also what you'd use for punching.
That's what I use for punch needle. Yep.
Or linen, which you can also use for punching.
You can. Yes.
Yep. Other people, when they see this, they go, oh, it's burlap. And I'm like, it's a little bit different than burlap. It's a little sturdier. It's a little bit softer than burlap. It's definitely more high quality.
Feels much better on your hands.
It's soft.
Isn't burlap made now from like a petroleum?
Yes, so burlap it can be like chemically treated. So I stay away from anything burlap unless you're like playing around, doing something really little and fun. It's not going to last as long as things made on these two types of materials. There are some other things out there like rug warp that you can find at specialty rug making shops. These are just the two that I carry in my studio and that we both use. So.
Yes, and then one thing I'll mention for punch needle, I don't know if it's as important as rug hooking, but there is a certain count. You can get different counts of monk's cloth.
Very good point.
And I believe it's like 11.
I think it's 13.
Is it 13?
12 to 13 holes.
Yes, holes per inch. Yes, it's been a long time since I thought about that.
Yeah, good for.
But that is really, really important because the difference between I feel a little bit between rug hooking and punch needle is you are a lot more dependent on the tension of the fabric with the punch needle because that's what's going to hold your stitch in place. You don't have quite as much control as you do with a rug hook, which is part of the reason I really love rug hooking in a way. I like control. Okay.
But yes, the punch needle is primarily on the monk's cloth. It's nice and gridded and it's wonderful to use. So that's the first thing you need. The second thing you need, and in both our cases is going to be a little bit different, but is for me, a rug hooking hook. So you probably can't see it very well from where you are, but here you go. That's a good angle. This is what a traditional rug hooking hook looks like. It's like a little crochet hook with a wooden handle, and I just have 3 different ones here. Again, you can see that hook is really little. I'll do as the people on YouTube do, so you can get a visual of that, but we'll get close-ups when we are demonstrating later too. This one has a hook that's a little bit bigger. If I put up my sweater, you can kind of see, and a bent handle there.
Does that one have a different name, the bent?
I've never just bent handle rug hooking hook. So you can
remember that.
It's good for people who have different ergonomic issues with their wrists. I don't actually use this. I just was selling it at one point. I don't have issues with my wrists, thankfully. So this feels really awkward for me, but for some people it's a lifesaver. So, and you have?
I have actually, at the last minute, I decided I would throw this in. I have 3 Oxford punches. These are Amy Oxford punch needle punches.
Yeah, actually, the box
This
over
is
here.
really, oh good, yes. This is really the only kind I would recommend. You can see this one is bigger. That's for bigger yarns. You can see the size of the actual shaft of the punch is a little different.
Ooh.
And then the difference, so this would be for a thicker yarn. This is for a thinner yarn. These two have the same size shaft, but you can see one is longer than the other. This one is going to give you longer loops. Now, you will sometimes see, and there's nothing wrong with this type of punch needle. The kind of nice thing about this is you can choose your length of loop that you want. The difference is you need a really long piece of wire that
like
you
a
feed
threader.
down here, yes, to thread it. And I feel like it just doesn't, it's more problematic for me somehow. It doesn't quite, it's not as smooth.
Yeah, it's just like, kind of like a more generic model, whereas this nice wooden one, it's a lot easier to thread your yarn through this hole here, and then you just use a little bit of tension to pull it down.
Exactly.
And this was very specific, at least at the time, to Amy Oxford, who designed this needle. It just makes it a lot easier to use.
It's really easy to
buy
use.
your official Oxford punch, if you're interested in doing that. It comes with whole instruction booklet, and a stitch counter as well.
All kinds of things.
So it's definitely worth the investment, I would say.
It definitely is. If you are thinking maybe you want to just try punch needle, you don't know if it's going to be for you. You may want to pick one of these up, or if you have kids that want to try.
Class.
That's why I have this for teaching a class. We had to buy like 20 of them, so we got this. These are 40-ish.
Yeah, they're a lot more.
Yeah, they're a lot more of an investment. And these, I think you can get for like, I don't know, maybe like 10 to 15. But anyway, so
that's a good point again with the rug hooking tools. These ones are like
my little book in
15 to 20. They're
I keep mine.
They're like kind of the more generic. This is called an Irish hook or a Hartman hook. It's much nicer, much smoother, handcrafted, around $45, $50. So they do come in a variety of different price ranges. And when you're just starting out, the generic stuff is fine. You take a liking to it, you can always upgrade your.
I've been using until recently.
That's right. Yes.
I have a prototype.
Yes.
I'll do the YouTube thing that Haley is working on. She and her husband Adam are working on making hooks of their own.
Yes.
And so I've been using this, and I really love it. It has this little divot. Haley didn't know I was going to do this, but my point is, I'm loving using this, but until I use this, Haley knows I use the hook that I got in my first kit I bought from Loop by Loop Studio.
What I use too.
For the past, 5 or 6 years.
This little hook. Yep. It's my favorite. It's
I used it for every project.
First one I've ever used.
I think really it's good to buy good materials and tools, but if you find something that works for you, that is, that's quality. It's lasting.
Lasts forever.
Yeah, it's just use what works for you.
Use
if it
what
costs
works for
more, spend a little more. But if it doesn't, don't feel like you have to spend more.
I mean, I do tell people, although you want materials that aren't going to make it harder for you, but I do tell people when rug hooking was first sort of introduced into people's lives, they would use a bent nail and a pattern, or an old seed sack that was stapled to a window or nailed.
It's just amazing what people. I know we both come from a background of crafts that are kind of cobbled together from other things and old clothes and strange tools.
Yeah.
And so
So that brings us to the third thing that we need for our rug making is the material to fill in our pattern and our foundation. And in rug hooking, as I said earlier, and Liz mentioned, it's mostly done with wool fabric strips. It's sort of what it's known for. Now, in my own work, I use a combination of wool fabric strips. I use silk. I use ribbons of whatever. I use roving. A lot of really high quality materials, but anything that's string-like that I can weave through the surface, you can use. But rug hooking, as I was saying, is really well known for these wool fabric strips. I tend to use in my more commercial work this what's called a number 8. It's a 1/4 inch wide. I'll show you a machine a little bit later of how I process these strips. My business is a lot of making these kinds of strips and helping people fill in their patterns, because this could be somewhat challenging part of rug hooking to get your hands on. You don't know where to get your wool. You don't know how to process the wool. Well, I do that for people. But if you are curious and you have some wool that maybe you either found from like the Salvation Army or secondhand shop, or you do end up buying a yard, all the wool is washed and dried. So all the fibers have been pre-shrunk and felted. So once I get it into that point, I cut it down to about this size and I put it through my cutter. So everything does get kind of washed and shrunk in order to cut down on all the fraying that when you're cutting your fabric into such small pieces. And these strips, they come in a variety of widths. This is one that's a little bit thinner, and then I have another ability to make really thin ones. But they also come in a variety of patterns. Again, I know it's hard to see because we're sort of far away, but this is more of like an ombre. This is a herringbone.
I love the texture that the different patterns bring to your work.
They do add a lot of different kinds of visual textures. In this, I happen to pick a rug that actually has a lot of flat color in it, except the background's kind of like a mottled effect.
This one I have on the edge. I have this was plaid,
kind of like a plaid.
Yeah,
but we can
you can just see it gives just a little. I like that it gives a little depth of color, a little bit of variety.
Now, if you are somebody that doesn't have a cutter and you're wondering, how can you make strips, you can get out the old ruler and the rotary cutter if you want to just kind of go down the line and cut with your little circular blade. The other thing you can do is you can take a piece that's about 13, 14 inches long, and you can fold it 4 times. And you can cut yourself a roughly, whoops, my cutting is not that great with these scissors, but you can also hand cut your wool strips, which is what people did at one point. So don't let it stop you from using wool if you don't have a fancy cutter, but I will show you the fancy cutter just for fun. So
yeah. I like the cutter.
Yeah.
But at home I cut mine.
Yeah.
Sometimes I use like t-shirts, or I use Abby's stuff, or just try different things.
And things.
Okay, so for punch needle, because if I were going to use this, it would have to go through this. Oops, let me get my punch out. Through this tube. It doesn't mean I couldn't try it, because I might have people do it. Yeah. But it's just a little bit trickier to thread through.
Right, because you want it flat and ribbon like.
Yes.
At least that's what most people are looking for.
Yes. So I tend to use yarn. This yarn I got from Haley. This is my new favorite. Yeah, it called Snowdrop, right?
It's Snowdrop's yarn.
Yes, Snowdrop's yarn.
It's snow made by drops.
Yes, I know. It was like I'm like, is it snow made by drop? So
and it's pretty much a chunkier, bulky yarn.
It is a chunkier, bulky yarn, which is why I would use this size. Then if I were going to use something like this, which is more of like a little sport weight or a DK, I would use my thinner punch. And that I can do that. Now, one thing I really like about rug hooking versus punching is if I wanted to, with rug hooking, I could double this back on itself 2, 3, 4 times, and I could hook like 3 loops at a time. So that, that just gives you an option.
Yeah. So the whole idea is the size of your material corresponds with the punch.
Yes.
It does in rug hooking too, although I'm somebody that uses the same little hook whether I'm hooking something small or something big. So it kind of depends on your hand. With punching, it really does depend more on the tool.
You are dependent on your punch. And then what was I going to say? The other thing is you just need to make sure your yarn is always moving freely through the punch, which we'll talk more about when we. So you wouldn't want like a boucle, a nubby yarn or a yarn. Nothing with like a kind of a knotty texture. You wouldn't want that knotty texture. But you could use, this is cotton yarn. You could use cotton yarn. You can use wool yarn. You can use, people do punch. They try like grocery bags. Yeah, this is like this actually came in like this crazy kit. It's like acrylic. It's that's nothing fancy.
So any kind of texture, just as long as it's smooth, basically.
Yes, exactly. This would be too thin. I have this out because I'm going to do a little embroidery on a piece. But, you know, I'd have to have, they do have tiny, tiny punch needles.
They do. It's called Ultra Punch.
Yes. And it looks more like, almost like a little patch you would make or something.
They're very small, usually because they take hours to do, because they're done with embroidery floss. So it's like doing a very fine
version of this.
Yeah.
I have tried it. You know, I'm not, I like this. Instant gratification.
If you want somebody that does it, want to learn, let me know. I know people. So
we have a friend who does it. So she was giving me some tips. So I haven't counted it out yet. I just need to revisit it.
Oh gosh. So finally, the fourth thing that you need for both rug hooking and punch needle is something to stretch your pattern taut. So I have a couple different things here. So I'll show you after, but when I rug hook, I tend to sit at a table and I pull my chair up to it, and table frame called the Chetty Camp frame. But a lot of times when I'm working on smaller projects, I use this Morgan no slip hoop stand combination where you can hook on both sides, and this comes apart so I can just use the hoop, one of the hoops as is at one time as well. Here's another example of like a good hoop you could use. Any quilting hoop, either wooden or plastic, that's 1 inch or bigger.
And this is all the same for punch
all
needle
the same
as
for
well.
punch needle.
I will say this is my new favorite punch needle frame, because I used to use a quilting hoop or an embroidery hoop. This I feel like is really safe because this is down here, and I never run the risk. I like to work on my lap of punching my leg by mistake.
Right,
so even I'm not like going crazy, but you might be watching TV while you're doing it.
Hit yourself.
And I've noticed that I can go a little faster with this because I feel safe with
this. You know, at least like 7 or 8 inches of space. And you might not be apparent right now. With punch needle, you're punching down from the top and you're punching your pile down to the bottom. Again, we'll review this. In rug hooking, you have your hands underneath and you're pulling your pile up. So that's why with punch needle, you might run the risk of punching that needle down and hurting yourself. The other thing that a lot of people like to do for rug hooking and punch needle is use frames with these gripper strips on them. And these are like a metal Velcro almost. You can get your patterns on here and get them really, really tight. I tend to move away from this kind of frame now. This is actually one that I made like ages ago. I don't use it as much anymore since I found the Morgan one, because it's a little bit heavier. It's a little clunkier. And I find that these bite me sometimes. They bite my arm a little. People love them though. If you have, like they sell these online. They sell big, thick
I have
frames,
one
that you can put on the table, nice and flat, and you can just punch and punch and punch away. So punch needle people love them because they don't run the risk as much of like with rug cooking, you're kind of like hugging your frame a little bit. You have both arms sort of around, trying to reach underneath. So for me, I just don't use it as much, but they're great options for both rug hooking and punch needle. And there's a million different styles out there that are way better than this. So they might not even bite you as much, but.
And again, it's finding what is comfortable for you, what you like to hold. I really do. I have my kind of oblong hoop that I got in a kit from Haley. And for the longest time, that was what I used for punching and rug hooking because it fit. It was something like that, only it was oval. It just fit nicely in my arm. And I still use that. I still, I'll take that with me when I don't have room.
But it's a smaller investment. Getting going.
Use an embroidery hoop. You don't need. The other thing you can do for punch needle, I don't know about for rug hooking, is you can buy. You could do it for rug. I'm like, I don't know about rug hooking, but you really could, I guess. You can buy like a cheap picture frame. Or canvas, you take the canvas off, you can staple gun or even
if your whole thing fits inside.
And you can almost have your artwork pre-framed. You put it around the empty frame that you've taken the painting canvas off, which you can save and use for something else. You have a built-in frame.
I will say for rug hooking, you tend to put a little more pressure onto the foundation.
And does it stretch?
It might stretch a little bit.
That's true. I haven't done it with rug hooking.
But with
punch needle.
Because again, that punch is doing a lot of that work for you. If there's a little less stretching, which is why the monk's cloth works well, because the needle really gets through the foundation. With rug hooking, you're just putting a more
When I teach punch needle classes, that's what we do. We have those ready so that way people can leave with their finished work of art or
already
finished.
on something and like all together and everything like that. So we're going to show you some different, basically like the main stitch for rug hooking, the main stitch for punch needle, and maybe a little bit more about some of the troubleshooting that goes along with that.
Yep.
And then we're expecting you guys to drop questions down in the comments or email us at expressivestitch@gmail.com if you have any questions.
Let us know.
Or want to share your work or
I
have
know
anything
we
to
love
add.
pictures. And, yes, because really, I think a lot of these things too, we get tips from you guys, and then that helps. It's very helpful to us as well.
For sure.
So, okay.
Yeah, so we'll be back. Thanks. Okay. Hey, I'm back. I wanted to show you again a little bit more about this wool cutting system that I have. I have a couple different things here in the studio, but this is what I primarily use, which is called my Townsend frame. What's great about this is I have 3 different blades that I pop in here, 3 different sizes that I cut for people. And the great thing about this is it's so easy to change your blades. You can see this says 8 on it because this is a number 8 or 1/4 inch wide. So when I use most, the other size that I use a lot is a number 6, which is 6/32 wide. All I have to do is put that new blade in there and close it up, and then I can go ahead and cut the wool. I'm gonna put the 8 back for now. And I'm gonna show you how I cut up my wool. Now, as I mentioned, because I have this big studio, I do buy a lot of my wool by the yard. I wash it and dry it, like I said. Some of them I do hand dye before I cut them. This is a mill dyed wool, and my source on this is Dorr Wool, Dorr. So you can always get wool from them, or you can get wool from me. And what I like to do is I like to rip my wool pieces down to about, 8 by 14 inches or so, and that's a good size to go through my machine. This one's been cut a little bit, so you can see it's a little bit wavy. In order to get a straight edge, I do that snip and the rip, and now I'll have a straight edge on the grain that I can cut on. I put that edge against my cutter here, I don't like squish it against here, but I just kind of like hold it against this little brace here, and then push and turn, and I get 6 strips at a time. And here's some strips that I can work with. So you can see I have all these baskets over here. I'm just gonna cut myself a few different patterns, and we can take a look at patterned wool versus solid wool. And this is all, as I said, the number 8 or 1/4 inch wide. It's the, in wide cut rug hooking, the size that I use the most. So let me come over here to my frame. As I mentioned, I'm using linen on this Morgan no slip hoop combo. I'm gonna grab my favorite hook, which is the very humble Moshimer hook here. And I'm just gonna sit at my frame. The other thing that I have is a Sharpie marker. And that's how I draw my patterns on top of my frame. Now you can see this one has a line, it has some holes, and that's because I was teaching this weekend. And this is the piece of fabric I used. What I did in here is I just have, like I said, that cut piece of linen. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get it as pretty much as taut as I can. So I'm just, closing up the clasp, and I'm just gonna kind of give all the edges a tug, just making sure that I'm getting this nice and tight in here. If your grid fabric starts to go kind of wonky, like if it gets a little wavy because of how tight you pulled your fabric, that's okay, don't worry about it. When you unstretch your fabric, that will straighten back out and kind of square back up. So, here's my Sharpie. So when I'm drawing out lines, or like maybe if I'm making like a square pattern, if I'm drawing a shape on here that is square or rectangular, I want to draw on the grain. So if you can take a look at what I'm doing here, if I'm going to draw a line, of course you could measure it with a ruler, but you want to make sure that the drawing part is in the ditch of the fabric. So basically on the line of holes. And that's how you draw lines that in the end will spring back into a like a geometric shape or a square or rectangle or what have you. And I can hook in any direction. So if you have something like a star or a heart or a circle, obviously that can't be drawn on the grain, but you want those kind of like outer edges to be on the grain. Again, just to give like a little bit of like strength, integrity to your rug, so it's not all kind of haphazard. And again, I should say too, the style of rug hooking I'm showing you is to make a usable object. So the rules are set based upon kind of the utility of the object that you're making. You can break some of these rules if you have an artistic vision. If it's not going to be used, we can always talk about that later. But again, these are sort of the rules when you're working on a rug to be used later. So here's one of my wool fabric strips. You know what, I'm going to start with the solid and then we'll show the patterned one. But here's the two here. I'm going to take the wool fabric strip in my right hand and I'm going to hold it up at the very top. And sorry if my fingers are dirty. It's just Sharpie marker because I was drawing patterns earlier. I don't have dirty hands, I swear. And I hold the hook in my hand just like I would a pencil. The hook is always facing up towards the ceiling. And as long as I'm keeping it in this position with the hook facing up all the time, I always know underneath where to grab the pattern. I'm sorry, the wool fabric strip, because I'm doing it blind. So I can see the top, but my hand underneath is going to be working and you can't see what's going on there. As I mentioned, I can hook in any direction. I personally like to hook kind of starting near me and away from me. I just find that to be really easy. As a lefty, I also like to hook from left to right. You might find the opposite of that if you're a right-handed person. So I'm gonna start right about here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna punch my hook down and then I'm gonna widen that hole. And I don't know if you can see that well in the camera, but it made it quite wide. And that's how big you want your hole to be. And don't skip that step because that's how your wool is gonna come up. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a little tail about 1 inch long, but it doesn't really matter. Just try to not to make it too short, 1 inch or bigger. And then from there, I'm gonna go in the next hole. Again, widen that hole. What happens when I widen that hole is I'm tightening the previous hole. Now I'm gonna take my fabric, slip it over the hook, bring the hook up and bring my hook back towards my work. If I were to bring my hook forwards, I'd end up slipping out the work I already did. So that's why I want to bring it back towards the work I did. So again, bringing it up, bringing it back. Let me do that a couple more times. And I'm bringing my loop about a quarter of an inch high. The other thing that I'm doing when it comes to spacing and height is if you look at it, that beautiful side angle that Liz has right now, you can see my loops are just lightly touching at the top. In fact, I can stick my hook through the loops at the bottom. This is the kind of spacing you want. And I achieve that kind of spacing by hooking with this width of fabric in every second, third hole, second, third. But I'm also not counting. I just know from experience that that is the kind of spacing that I need in order for them to all stand up nice and straight. If I hooked too tightly together, which I'll just do now to show you, I'm going in about every hole. I think I am going in every hole. Look what happens to my loops. They start to lean because there's not enough foundation in there. So they will press all together. So I'm gonna take those back out and I'm gonna skip some holes. But it's never really about counting. It's more about just sight and feel. You can feel it in your hand if you're hooking too tightly. And you just want to make sure when you're looking down on top of the loops that you're not seeing any of the linen or the foundation in between them just when you're looking down. When you're looking at the side, you should be able to clearly see through them. And the other thing that I'm doing, I'm going to bring this back. I'm going to show you some more about that stitch I'm making. So that's about the spacing. What we're striving for in rug hooking in the traditional manner, making a usable object, all the disclaimers, is we're looking for very ribbon-like wool strips, or wool loops rather, meaning they're rectangular. They're not twisted so much. They're just coming up like perfect little loops, like the Loch Ness Monster kind of, like very ribbon-like and flat. The way that I'm doing that is that if I'm working in this line that's kind of diagonally away from myself, I'm always holding my hook perpendicular to that line. So crisscrossing the line I want to move in. So let me put my hook back down and you can see. So here's my hook. You can see I'm holding it so that there's like, almost like it's like a line here. You can't really see it because it's underneath the foundation. You can kind of see the silverness there. But what I'm doing is I'm taking the wool strip and I'm just putting it over the hook like so. I'm putting it as flat as I can on that hook, and I'm letting the hook just grab the edge of that strip and bringing it up. But by holding my hook perpendicular to that line, you know what? I'm gonna flip it up and I think I can probably show you. Let me do that.
Oh yeah, perfect.
So here's my hook. It comes down. See how it's coming down? I'm moving this way. The hook's going that way. What I'm doing is I'm taking the ribbon, I'm keeping it as flat as I can in my fingers. Okay, and I'm just placing it on the hook like so. Now it's going to be really hard to see because in order to get the stitch correct, my fingers have to be touching this foundation and the hook. So I'm essentially blocking everything that you're trying to get, but I can kind of show you loosely, just putting the strip on. I'm grabbing it, and pulling it up. Now, if I were to do it the way that I should, I'm keeping it on, and I'm keeping my fingers on the whole time it's underneath. So again, I'm essentially blocking what the camera wants to see. Keeping my fingers on there and pulling it up, and then I'll move my hand out of the way. And that's also helping the tension, because if I were to grab it down here and kind of let it go, sometimes it'll create, I don't think it did, but it did.
Yeah, it did.
It creates bulk here. So by doing all of this very close to the foundation, that's how I'm keeping it nice and smooth. And doing it by the foundation keeps the wool strip onto the hook, so it doesn't fall off before I have a chance to bring it up. And what else did I want to show you about this? I wanted to show you, again, ways to keep the ribbon flat. So when people are starting out, a lot of times to get the wool on the hook, I mean, honestly, do anything you can to get the wool on the hook and just bring it up. But people often wonder why their loops are coming up twisted. I'll show you a twist. So this is what I'm doing. I'm keeping it nice and flat and putting it on the hook. A lot of times people just will like flip it on like that. They'll kind of twist it around the hook and they'll bring it up. It's not a huge deal, but see how that little soldier is not really in line anymore. It's kind of looking off at the birds over there or whatever. So that's considered a twist. It's natural for it to happen in your work, and don't get frustrated. I say just keep hooking through it. But some people, they know it's wrong and they want to fix it. So it's more about, again, probably can't see. It's more about, again, here's my hook, taking this nice and flat and just placing it on top rather than twisting it around. The other thing that happens when people want to put the wool in the hook is sometimes they'll have the ribbon, they'll have it like nice and flat, but they put it on backwards. It's really about sort of lifting it up and placing it over rather than like twisting it on. It's okay. You'll find your way with it. The first probably, I would say 10, 15 rugs I did were all twisted. They're all twisted. It doesn't really matter. But for a floor rug, again, just these are the rules that are dictated based upon the utilitarian of the rug. The strongest rugs are made with wool fabric strips, and they're made in this manner because they're less likely to get caught on things. And that's all that is. If you have a vision in your mind to make an artistic rug full of twists and loops and all sorts of different colored or height, you know, everything everywhere, then do that, and don't worry too much about it. So spacing when you are placing your strips next to each other when you're filling in. Oh, and by the way, this is why we leave tails, because sometimes I want to go in and I want to finagle my loops a little higher, which is what I just did. Everything is 2 to 3 holes away from each other. So if I'm going in and doing a row next to this one, I'm also going to skip 1 to 2 holes, or well, 2 to 3 holes, I mean. Basically 2, and I'm going to hook next to, in another line, next to the one I just made, but far enough away that it's giving both of these 1/4 inch wide strips enough room that they're not too squished together. And this is that patterned wool. As I said, this is a herringbone, and I really like using herringbones because they just give you a little more sparkle because they're a patterned wool. I've gotten to a point now where I'm going to have to make a turn. So the way I do that again is just how I hold my hook. So what I'm going to do now is I was hooking this way in order to get that line. Simply by just turning my hook this way and hooking, I can make sort of a right angle. And now I can hook in this line. So it's all in how you hold your hook is how the directions work. The other thing I can do, if I don't feel like turning my hand in this kind of funky way, since I'm working on a hoop, I'll just turn the hoop. And now I can hook in a position. Again, hooking towards myself, away from myself, is just more comfortable for me. If you're working on a hoop, don't worry about it. Just turn the hoop. You might also notice too that I'm hooking in an area that is comfortable for my hand to reach. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to take this apart and show you without this, extra stand, how I would hook against the table. So when I'm hooking and using a hoop, the positioning is actually more important than you'd think, because you want to be comfortable and you want to always hook in an area you can reach. So for me, because I'm left-handed, I take my hoop, I put one side of it underneath my elbow, which makes this area really easy to reach. So my hand is most comfortable hooking over here. Again, if I turned this, it would be over here. And that's, something to pay attention to, because some people, sometimes they get down here and they're like, oh, I can't hook. And it's like, oh, just flip it around so that your hand can reach, but also use your body, elbow against the table, holding one side. And I use kind of like my sternum. Is that the thing?
Like it's like your rib, your upper rib cage. Yeah.
Where do your sternum's
up here?
Yeah,
that would be a little hard to see. Your xiphoid process. You get it all pressed up in there.
Basically, just under, my ribs there. And kind of stabilize this hoop with the hand underneath, giving it a little bit of a gap here with this elbow here. So that's one way to kind of make the hooking easier for yourself, is pay attention to, because as I mentioned, we are putting a bit of pressure onto this foundation. You're putting pressure when you're going in and you're making that hole nice and wide, and you're putting pressure when you're actually pulling up the loops. With every loop you make, your little cluster of loops is strengthening each other. So these loops function, they press against each other, and that's what keeps everything from falling out. Also, we mentioned the back is nice and smooth. So as long as you keep filling this in, the stronger and stronger it's going to get. And there's no risk of anything falling out, especially after you unstretch this, you finish the edges, and you iron it. So the last step, once you have a pattern that's filled in, is you'll steam the top with a wet cloth and an iron, and that also strengthens those loops together and slightly felts them together. If you're making a usable object that just becomes stronger, the more you squish on that over and over again, like a chair cover or something, the more you use it, the more the surface felts together. What am I missing? Am I missing anything about?
How about when you end? When you finish, when you find you're coming to the end of a strip, what do you do?
Good call. So I started here with this inch-long tail, and I ended here. I did all these loops, and I ended with this inch-long tail. And what I'm doing is I'm just trimming them down to the same height as my loops, which again are about 1/4 inch tall. And I'm just trimming them down, and these get all hidden in the surface of the rug hooking and pressed together on those loops.
So you start with the tail, you end with the tail.
And everything comes up to the top.
Yep.
Any fiber. You could also, with the color, you could go in with a couple of loops and then bring the other tail up. So you don't have to always finish a wool fabric strip the whole way. You can just use part of it to fill in little areas depending on your design. If I think of things.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's a great, that is, if we forgot something, throw it in the comments and we can do, the next 2.0, rug hooking 2.0.
Yeah, but what we'll probably do in the future is one all about hooking with other materials. But we'll just leave it at this for now. This is the same technique you would use with wool fabric strips, with yarn, t-shirt, ribbons. It'd actually be easier. If you're not trying to get these nice rectangular loops, it all becomes a little bit easier in some ways, maybe harder in some other ways. So I hope that you'll grab your Sharpie and get going, and let me know if you need any help with that. I'd love to help.